tonight I'll be talking with you all about an article that I read from the EdTech website, Focus on K-12. The article is titled Data-Driven Instruction, How Student Data Guides Formative Assessments. So I chose this article and was just really excited when I came across it because the idea of formative and summative assessments is something that is extremely relevant to me as an elementary school administrator. We began implementing the process and the idea of these formative and summative assessments about a year ago. At that time, our school was a level 1 school, and we just really struggled with student achievement and student growth over the past few years. However, we started implementing these formative and summative assessments and really looking at the data and digging deep in the data and using that data to inform our instruction. And I'm really proud to say that we went from a level 1 school to a level 5 reward school. And I really feel like a lot of that comes back to these formative and summative assessments. So the article begins by talking about what formative and summative assessments are. So formative assessments, those are the assessments that you would use on a regular basis in the classroom. So it may be something that you do daily. It could be in the form of an exit ticket. It could be in the form of a discussion, a short worksheet, anything that would help you to assess students' understanding of the standard that was taught that day. So a teacher would give the formative assessment. They would analyze the data from their class based on the formative assessment, and then they would make adjustments to their instruction based on the needs of the students. So, for example, if a teacher analyzed the data and they saw that 50% of their class mastered the standard, those students, that half of the class, they would move on to higher level learning. So they would extend their learning of that standard, or they may move on to the next standard in the instructional guide or the pacing guide. However, that other 50%, if they didn't understand the standard and they didn't master the content, then they wouldn't be expected to move on. The teacher would go back and reteach that content immediately to ensure that the students mastered that standard prior to moving on to the next standard. Summative assessments, they are what has been described to me in the past as the autopsy. You're looking at student learning after it's already all taken place. So a summative assessment would be like the TN Ready assessment. So you've taught students for an entire year, and then you give this TN Ready assessment and you look at the data, but really the data, it's great data and it's a great tool to help you reflect as an educator. But as far as doing anything to improve the instruction for those students, there's really not a whole lot you can do, because by the time we get that data, the students have already moved on to the next grade. So the summative assessments are more of those culminating assessments at the end of a unit, or end of a 9 weeks, or even end of the school year. So the article goes on to talk about, after describing what formative and summative assessments are, the article goes on to share how teachers can use online forms to gauge student learning. So there are 3 main components that are discussed. One of those is differentiating the levels for understanding. So I'm just going to go through all of these and then talk about them all. The second is learners and teachers need to use results to see if the learner can make adjustment independently or if the learner needs help. And then the third one is evidence should provide information about transferability of knowledge to inform the next step. So all of these things basically come down to the fact that formative assessments can essentially differentiate learning for our students in our classes. So again, the formative assessment, if you give an assessment, you can, after the teacher analyzes the data, the teacher can see who gets the standard, who's mastered the standard, who maybe is struggling a little bit or maybe has it kind of in between, and then who really needs that extra help to be able to master the standard. So it helps us to provide differentiated instruction. The other thing that the article talks about is how online quizzes, surveys, polls, how they can be manipulated individually based on student needs. So there are so many resources that are available to teachers that allow them to analyze the data online. And then actually there are so many programs and resources that actually provide almost a learning path for the teachers to help them see, okay, here, if you have a student that didn't master a particular standard, then what is the learning path that they need to be on to be able to master that standard. So it really, these online quizzes and surveys and assessments, formative assessments, they can really help to guide instruction and help the teacher to know what are the next steps to take. There was a new term that was introduced in the article, and it was adaptive learning. And this idea of adaptive learning, I'm just going to quote what it states in the article. So, adaptive learning encourages teachers and students to approach education from a flexible perspective, expanding and improving curriculum based on student progress. So, the whole idea of these formative assessments, it really is all based around this term, adaptive learning. So, instead of approaching education as, here's your opportunity to master the standard. If you don't master it, then we're moving on. And if you do, great. So, it really, these formative assessments helps us to know specifically the standards that students are struggling with, and then helps us to inform instruction to be sure that all students master the standards. So anyhow, this was a great article. It's something that I'm definitely passionate about, something that's very relevant to all educators, whether elementary or high school. And essentially, the article concluded just by stating how technology can be a tool to assess learning, but also to teach the standards. So technology is definitely a great tool that can help us as educators. Thanks for listening.